So let's pick up on one point that we talked about last time, which was the belief that we have no right to happiness. Happiness being the purpose of relationship. Purpose is not to stick with it. Purpose is not to endure. Purpose is not to put up with it. Purpose is happiness. And if you're unhappy, then of course you work on it by addressing, processing, and resolving what has come up as a problem and move through it and move on. But some of us don't believe that we have a right to be happy, and so we will remain in relationships that are unhappy and in jobs that are unhappy and in circumstances that are unhappy because we never imagined that we deserved anything more. And a way to tell that, here are some of the signs. One is that you always put other people first, and their happiness matters more than yours. Which seems at first blush to be a highly evolved spiritual choice. But it isn't really. Another sign in this context is that loyalty becomes uppermost. I have to remain loyal to someone, and you might even imagine that such loyalty is love when it isn't really. You see, when you're being loyal to a circumstance that's unhappy, you're not being loyal to your own inner child or even to your inner self. You can tell it's real loyalty when it never contradicts loyalty to yourself. But if the loyalty is motivated by indebtedness to your partner, or by guilt, or by hope that things will get better, or by your history together, or by pity that you have for him or her, then it's the unhealthy loyalty. Some of us even imagine that pity is a sign of love, and the real compassion of the Buddha is a sign of love. But this is a distorted approach to the Bodhisattva vow, which says, I ask that all people be enlightened before I receive my own enlightenment. But that comes from someone who, in the Zen ox-herding pictures, is described as entering the marketplace with bliss-bestowing hands. So if you're in that happy state, then the giving makes sense. But if you're unhappy, something's wrong, because saints are not sad, except when something sad happens. Another sign is you deny your self-protective instinct continually, so you don't even believe that you have the right to defend yourself. Another sign is you can't speak up or change or leave because you might hurt the other person. And of course, a healthy person realizes that you don't hurt someone by leaving him or her. If he feels hurt, then that's his work. But you have to make the choices you have to make, as long as they're responsible. Another sign is you can't claim your own power or even feel your own power without guilt, or even make decisions that are powerful. Another sign is a nostalgia or an attachment to the original romance, so that you hold on to your memories. And finally, if your parents or cultural or religious imperatives modeled to you or insisted that you follow this concept of put up with anything and happiness is selfish, then of course you will not be able to be happy, because as I said last time, it's your choice, and no one in the relationship is making you unhappy. You're unhappy because you don't believe you have a right to happiness. Those of us that have gone through Connecticut winters and lived with Catholic crucifixes got used to the style of enduring, okay? And it became just part of our worldview. So now we have to cherish the beautiful things without letting them divest us of our right to happiness. Everybody follow? Fairly simple. Good. So you can put that into practice. And we move on to this question of lively energy. I just want to follow up on this one. We talked about this more in the fear class, but the lively energy is your passionate, responsive, spontaneous, lively way of interacting with the universe. And this lively energy could be in a relationship, not through the other person's fault, but through your own set of choices. The lively energy could be depleted in the relationship, or it could be animated. Obviously, if you have a right to happiness, then you would want to have your energy animated. And I have a way of helping us decide which is going on, because for most of this, we're so unconscious, we don't even realize we're unhappy. Your energy is depleted if most of your activities, most of the things that you do in the relationship, come from habit, compulsion, or obligation. So you write down all the things you did today in the relationship. Write it down again tomorrow. Take my list here, and after it, put H for habit, O for obligation, C for compulsion. I just had to do that. So that's where the addictive part comes in. And if that's going on, you're probably depleting your lively energy. Whereas if it's healthy, the motivation is spontaneity. Just suddenly felt like doing it, so we did it. Enthusiasm. I'm really excited about doing this, that's why I'm doing it. Or choice. I'm choosing to do this. See, that's the opposite of obligation and habit. And this would apply to jobs, any number of things. Friendships, too. In fact, a lot of what we'll be saying in this class about relationships, although we're referring to intimate sexual relationships, also has to do with friendship. Okay, any questions about these two items? So test yourself out. Ask yourself, well, what's the percentage of what I do in this relationship that comes from habit? And what's the percentage that comes from choice? And so forth. Am I really into what we're doing? Do I really have enthusiasm? Or am I just doing it out of obligation? Or do I feel forced to do it? Because what's at stake is your lively energy. The only thing we have that keeps us in tune with the universe, which is full of lively energy all the time. And never operates out of obligation or compulsion. So, now we can begin our subject for tonight, which is the phases of relationship. It seems that relationships go through some phases, the first one being romance, and then conflict follows to bring romance to an end. And then there are other phases that we'll take one by one. And it's normal for all human experiences to go through phases. So conflict is not a sign that something's wrong with the relationship. Conflict is a sign that the relationship is a healthy human choice. And like all healthy human choices and all healthy human experiences, it will go through its bell-shaped curve. So it'll rise and fall and rise and fall again. In fact, all human experiences have this shape. We get to enjoy something, and then we crest with it, really enjoying it a lot, really being into it, and then we start to decline and move on to something else, to a new focus. Hopefully these new focuses will happen within one relationship, as opposed to moving from one to the other. And sometimes what people mean by in love, how do I know if I'm in love with you? They sometimes mean I'm at the crest. That's not what in love would be about. So you could mistakenly think that you're in love when you're feeling high with the other person. But we will get to this, and you'll see that it's about more than that. Now, these phases are not linear. You drift in and drift out. It isn't romance, conflict. It could be romance, conflict again, back and forth. But it seems as if these phases are a given of existence, and our purpose is not to make love stay one way, or to make anything stay one way. That was the era of Faust, who said, "Abide, thou art so fair, to his peril and to his doom." But our purpose is not to make love stay, but to stay with love as it moves through all the vicissitudes and changes that it needs to move through. If things go through phases, it would follow that work needs to be done as we move from phase to phase, that each phase needs to end with grieving the end and facing the challenge of the new. And when you work through things in relationship, and most of what you're working through seems literally about the person you're with, but usually it has a lot to do with what happened to you in your own childhood, and so it's a metaphor for all the work you haven't done from your own past. When you work through things, then your relationship becomes a crucible for personal transformation. But when you don't work through things, it becomes a cauldron instead of a crucible, where everything just stays boiling and eye of gnat and wing of bat are floating on the surface without much appeal. Of course, if your approach is to endure, then the phases don't matter because you're just enduring all the phases. But if your purpose is to enjoy and work through things, the two purposes in my mind of relationship, to enjoy and to work through things. Don't get in if you don't want to work through things, because you will have things to work through. Then the phases become okay with you. And you give an unreserved consent to the conditions of existence. C.S. Lewis has this quote I wanted to share. "Humanity does not pass through phases as a train passes through stations. Being alive, it has the privilege of always moving, yet never leaving anything behind." So it's more like that. Okay, so let's take a look at our first phase, which is romance. And this is phase one. I hope and presume. And this is where two egos meet up with two ego ideals. There's the ideal that my ego always wanted, says one ego, and the other one says there's the ideal that my ego always wanted. So it begins with a projection. In other words, I attach to you the answer to all my dreams, and in effect, there is no shadow. I don't see any shadow side to you at all, nothing negative. Even if I do see something negative, I find it endearing and isn't that cute. But things that are cute now will be up-cute later. So now we're starting to see something about the fall in love. You fall in love with a projection of yourself and not the true other. And the heart of the illusion is this. It feels so strong, it must be real. It feels so powerful, it just has to last. It'll never be any different from this. See, it's a picture of love, not love itself. Like the picture in your mind of the roast beef is not like the roast beef that came on the platter in the restaurant, necessarily. It's a picture of love because there is no real other, since the real other, the real thou, isn't an ego ideal, but is sometimes fulfilling an ideal, and most of the time just downright real with a big shadow component to deal with. So the two egos are looking at the mirror image of their own ideals, and like all mirrors, it presents a reflection, a picture, not the real person. The real person is not in the mirror, that's the picture of the real person. The real person is standing looking. Now, romance gives us permission to go out of control, do crazy things. Well, he's in love, what are you going to do? So he's not going to be very responsible. Part of it is attachment, clinging, and this attachment and clinging, which also includes possessiveness, is, I think, what we mostly mean by being in love. Okay? Now, in love could mean I really love you and I feel wonderfully energized with you. It could mean that. But it could also mean these kind of negative things of being very attached and very possessive. And when that attachment still feels good, you say you're in love. And when the attachment no longer feels good, you say, I'm no longer in love. So you marry someone and you're in love, the attachment feels good. That's translated as, I'm in love. 10 years later, you're certainly still attached to that person, but it no longer feels good to be attached to him because it's so painful. And you translate that as, I'm no longer in love. Everybody follow? I want to get away from the magical thing that in love is the special state that makes being out of control okay, or that makes us just have to go along with the plan and just have to get married and just have to be together because after all, I'm in love, and what could be more powerful than that? What's more powerful than that is sanity. When a person says, well, I'm not in love with you anymore, now I'm in love with him, could it be, I'm still attached to you, but it no longer feels good. I'm attached to him, and it does feel good. That could be what it's about. And of course, I also believe that being in love is a form of fear, which we talked about in the other class. It's full of adrenaline, and obviously it's also about desire, fear and desire being the two components of the neurotic ego. So we're not in very safe waters here. Your thoughts become obsessive and often unreasonable. And there's always the sense that you finally have found the perfect complement of yourself. So once again, then, falling in love is not with a thou. It's not I to thee, not I, thou. It's I to my thou. And that's more of what the other person is. And hence possession, my. It's more like the mutual gazing and validating that is found in the mother-child relationship, legitimately. And Irvin Yalom says, in romance, you see the reflection of your own beseeching gaze. And yes, I've been beseeching the universe to send me the right one. And as I gaze at you, I see that the universe has fulfilled my wish. And I see in you the reflection of what I always wanted. So you must be the one. Whereas in reality, such a statement as that should lead one to run the other way. Because what is actually going on might be you found someone who will touch off exactly the chemical reflexes in your psyche that will bring up all the pain of your past and all the unfulfilled wishes and needs so that you can finally deal with them. And you may not like that. So my advice is this. If everything is wonderful, don't get married. Wait till everything is not wonderful. Then it's more real. Then you can make a decision more intelligently. You see, what attracts us most at the beginning may be exactly what most divides us later. And since the psyche is a combination of opposites and seeks opposition in order to bring forth wholeness, something is going on in our very psyche that makes us look for the opposite of what we think we found. And when you're starting to be careful about that, you make new decisions. More careful decisions about other people. Also, part of romance is the realization that he loves me. And you're so thrilled by the fact that somebody loves you in that unconditional way, that ricochet of the love from the other person could feel like love in you. But in the long run, it could be that romance is just stress with a cherry on top. See, you also might make a big investment in someone because of the big feeling that you have about this person, when actually the big feeling is giving you information about the big amount of work that you have to do on yourself. Now, I want to mention one more thing about this. This is very fascinating. That in this romance phase, something happens to your sense of reality about that other person. You will inflate who he is. You will see him as bigger than he is. You will embellish his characteristics rather than just see him as he is. So the inflation and the embellishment of his value and of his charms, maybe even of his good looks, creates the romantic feeling that hooks you to that other person. So we would want to wait until things deflate and until the embellishments are removed before we really knew who that other person was. This poem by Amy Lowell seems so beautifully stated to me and seems to make a comment on this whole subject. She says, "When first you came, you were red wine and honey, and the taste of you burnt my mouth with its sweetness. Now you are the morning bread, smooth and pleasant. I hardly taste you at all, but I know your savor, and I am completely nourished." Now that's an example of the beauty of the romance that went from the red wine and honey to the not as tasty but pleasant bread. Was able to make that transition, but yet I still feel completely nourished because I have the nourishment of the romance phase, which is aimed at the little kid within us that has fun, spontaneity, sex, and so forth. as time goes on and you start to see the other person's shadow and experience conflict and so forth, and you start to resolve things even, then you are nurturing the adult part of yourself. And of course, later on, when you transcend all this, then you start to feed your soul. So in a real relationship, all three are taken care of. Now listen to this quote from Gone with the Wind, and it's not from the movie, this is from the book. And this is Scarlett speaking about her fancied lover, who's never really her lover in reality. And this is her reflection about what she's been up to. He never really existed at all except in my imagination. I loved something that I made up. I made a suit of clothes and fell in love with it. When Ashley came along, I put that suit on him and made him wear it whether it fitted him or not. I wouldn't see what he really was. I kept on loving the pretty clothes and not him at all. So this was known in 1939. Now, I also found this song written by Carolyn Lee, which helps us understand romance. How little we know, how much we discover. What chemical forces flow from lover to lover? How little we understand what touches off that tingle, that sudden explosion when two tingles intermingle. Who cares to define what chemistry this is? Who cares, with your lips on mine, how ignorant bliss is? So long as you kiss me and the world around us shatters, how little it matters, how little we know. So it could seem as if something in her is reaching out to something in me. It could seem that way. It could seem like a true connection, a true I and thou, a true interaction, when all the while she could be seeing me, not as I am, but as she needs me to be. I could be seeing her, not as she is, but as I need her to be. And even more subtly, it could be that the movement toward me isn't the movement of someone who leaves herself behind and enters my world. It could be someone who's so narcissistically needy that she simply brings all of her neediness and deposits it in me, hoping thereby to find an end to it. You can tell the difference between the people in your life who reached out forgetting themselves and found you. You can tell the difference between that and the people who clung to you because they needed something from you, but they didn't cling in an obvious way. They clung by embracing. And so it was confusing. It seemed like, oh, this is an embrace. Somebody loves me and is holding me. But could it be that instead of someone holding me, that person was clinging to me for his or her own need fulfillment over and above mine, as opposed to we'll do it cooperatively, if you see what I mean. So this is why we have to be so careful in romance, because romance suspends our judgment. And people who ordinarily were very intelligent find that their intelligence doesn't help them very much in this, because the romance has suspended their intuition and their good sense. This is what we mean by love is blind, but that's not love. That's the projective romance that we're talking about. Romance also suspends fear. This is very important. This is what makes you say, 10 years into the relationship, I know he's got it in him to show affection, because I remember the affection that he showed in the romantic part of our relationship. But you didn't realize that romance suspended the fear of closeness, so that during the romance phase, of course he could show closeness. Mother Nature, knowing that romance leads to sex and sex leads to procreation in the ordinary course of things, suspends everything that might get in the way of that. Don't underestimate that angle of it. So, yes, he had a fear of closeness even at the beginning, but the fear of closeness was suspended because Mother Nature knew fear of closeness means no procreation. Drop it. Also suspends priorities. Woman has 3 children, she abandons them for the sake of the demon lover. It suspends addictions. Well, during that part, he didn't seem to drink at all. The drinking stopped. He was willpower and no problem. Started drinking later. It even suspends your basic instincts like survival. That's why Romeo and Juliet wind up dead. Here will I set up my everlasting rest, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace. And lips, O you, the doors of breath, seal with a righteous kiss a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Come, bitter conduct. Come, unsavory guide, thou desperate pilot. Now at last, lead on the dashing rocks thy seasick, weary bark. Romeo's last words. Fanatical attachment to religion does the same thing. Suspends the fears, the priorities, the addictions, the need for survival. That's why you can have a Jonestown or a Waco. So this is a very dangerous time in one's life. And we can be fooled by the promises and then feel betrayed when the promises are not kept and our partner returns to his original fears and his original priorities and his original addictions and his original attachments and so forth. And of course, the partner was not lying. It really was suspended, and that's why it's so joyous. Why is it so wonderful? Because fear is gone. Fear is gone. And of course, the opposite of fear is love. So when fear is gone, you imagine this must be the real thing. This must be love. And in many ways it is. And of course, romance is wonderful, and we're not trying to put it down. We're just being more aware of some of the dangers that are implicit in it. So in this romance phase, the original needs and the needs of all your life are met in thee tonight. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. That fits. So this is why you love this particular person above all others. And of course, the one who's really doing his work will say, aha, this is giving me information about my real needs and how unfulfilled they really are. Because look at how much projection I've put into this relationship. This poem by Rumi I thought was helpful too. He says, the moment I heard my first love story, I started looking for you. Not knowing how blind that was, lovers do not finally meet somewhere. They are in each other all along. So this is the difference between falling in love, because you fall into an inflation and into an embellishment and into a suspension of fears, and rising in love, which is a healthy, sane choice that contains the fondness but isn't swept away by it. Falling in love is compulsive, rising in love is choice. A way that I see these come together is the scene in the film Robin Hood, if you recall. The scene where Maid Marian is talking to her maid, and she's starting to believe that she may be in love with Robin. And she says to the maid, "How can you tell that you're in love?" And the maid, I don't have the exact words, but the maid says something like, "Well, your legs get very weak and you start to lose your appetite and you can't sleep." And my statement, of course, that it's all about fear. And everything is kind of strange and so forth. And, of course, she has many of these symptoms. Then Robin appears and he says, "Why don't you come with me to Sherwood and leave the palace, and Friar Tuck can marry us and we'll be living happily ever after," because he says, "I love you too," and so forth. Now, here's the important part. He makes that proposal, but her priorities have not been suspended because she's a real adult. So she doesn't say, "Yes, take me away." She doesn't say, "Yes, let's do it," the way Juliet does. She doesn't do that. She says, "No, Robin, I can be of more help if I stay here in the palace, listening, finding out what King John is up to, so that we can both be loyal to Richard and to England, and when all this is over, then we can be together." That's somebody rising in love. She's not losing her control. She's not losing her will. She's simply experiencing the reality of love as choice, as sane fondness, as priorities intact, boundaries intact, and her higher calling takes the place of her romantic feeling. Everybody follow? Any questions about this? Good. Yeah. The opposite of real love is fear, because fear refuses to integrate and love integrates all. So when they say the opposite of love is indifference, they mean the opposite of being in love, which has to do with attachment, because indifference is detachment. Now, in this context, of course, is sex. And when sex is based on a charge and is stimulating and has a lot of sensation in it, that's not necessarily coming from the feeling of love. So sex could be about sensation, could be about what the senses feel. We use the word feel in English, but really it's what the senses sense. So sex being good does not necessarily give us information about whether this is the right partner, because our sensations will respond, our senses will respond just autonomically. And this sensation can lead to a feeling of bonding, and that's how to tell that it's the real sex, when it leads to bonding and commitment. That's how you know it's real. You trust more and more as opposed to you sense more and more. And in the immature sex, of course, the sex is an end in itself, but doesn't go anywhere. So you're all pumped up with nowhere to flow, if you see what I mean. And Woody Allen, in commenting on this, says, sex without love is a meaningless experience, but among other meaningless experiences, it ranks as one of the best. So again, we're looking at sex and asking ourselves, could we be attracted based on charge? How much charge you bring up in me, how excited I get physically, and the excitement of physicality leads to the sensations. Or is my attachment based on choice of you, of thou, thee in this case, and that leads to bonding and commitment. So tonight when you're in the bedroom and your partner says, "Oh, that feels so good," just say, "No, excuse me, now that's not a feeling, that's a sensation." Now, we don't want to repress the charge, we want to enjoy it. We want to be like Ulysses, who was able to sail by and listen to the siren song, enjoy it, but not get hooked by it. Don't get dashed on the rocks. Tie yourself to the mast so that you can hear the song, but you won't jump overboard. So we don't want to repress the charge, we want to enjoy it, we want to acknowledge it, but we don't want to get hooked by the drama and the sensation that is behind it. And of course, the duller the inner life of people in a relationship, the more sophisticated is the search for thrills. Thrills are sensations without feelings. In other words, superficiality. That's what it means to be superficial. It means to enjoy things on the sensational level, as opposed to the deeper, ecstatic thrill of bonding and commitment. And some people have never had sex any other way but as sensation. And some people keep it that way because secretly they fear closeness and they want to make sure that they don't let it lead to bonding. So they're going to keep it on that charge level. Sex sometimes portrays, I've seen in counseling with couples, that sometimes sex portrays the real relationship and sometimes it doesn't. So I have to look carefully at that subject when I'm working with people. It could accurately portray what's going on. For instance, man loses his erection and woman never has orgasm. Could mean that here there's a low interest in the male and a deep dissatisfaction in the female. It could mean that. At other times, it could be that nothing works in the relationship, but the sex is great. The sex hasn't changed. That's just as good as it always was. By that they mean, of course, the sensations are as good. And when sex is good, no matter how bad things are, you're in real trouble. Because that means you're capable of splitting your own self, your own body. You're dissociating what's going on inside you from what's going on in your body. That is scary stuff. What people do when they were abused early in life. They dissociated, let anything happen to my body, and dissociate with their mind. So I hate you, but I can still have good sex with you is very bad news to those who are trying to be healthy. Nancy Qualls Corbett, in her book The Sacred Prostitute, which I recommend, says that superficial sex is motivated by conscious design or unconscious demand. But what we're proposing here is not sex for joy, but sex because of joy. Because I'm so much into you and I enjoy you so much that's why sex happens. And it's happiness in the inner world that has been discovered, not happiness externally. And my boundaries aren't destroyed and dissolved, but they're expanded because of my sexual contact. And your presence becomes primary and the sensations become secondary. So I'm not here having sex with your body, I'm here having sex with you. And when that happens, you could even allow it to be ordinary and not make a big deal out of it and even have humor in it. Because really, sex should, if you look at yourself in the full-length mirror with no clothes on, this is my rule of thumb. And I looked at myself this way 3 or 4 years ago. And you look at yourself and you look at your genitals and say, the importance of sex should be the same proportion as my genitals are to the rest of my body. That's how much interest they should take if you look at it in a proportional way. Shouldn't be a big deal. And finally, I have to throw in that everyone has a right to private autoerotic experience, even in relationship, because that's another way that we can self-nurture. So we want to give ourselves permission for that if we choose. Everybody follow?